She's on our management committee and she's from the Women's Centre for Health Matters. Last year she had an article published in New Matilda, which is an online magazine, about the relationship between feminism and trans politics. And then Lexxie is going to speak to us, and she's from the Sex Workers Outreach Project, and she got involved with AGA having worked with trans clients and became interested in trans issues and wanted to get an expert perspective on the trans community in the ACT. And then we have Biff, who is also on our management committee and was a founding member of Women's Liberation in Australia back in 1970. And Biff supports AGA as a key player in the ongoing gender revolution. So what we're going to do is have each person speak for about 5 minutes and then open it up for questions and just general discussion and more scone eating after that.
You should say who you are too.
Oh, I'm Isabel. I'm Isabel. I started working for AGA about a month ago doing events management, so it's been going absolutely fantastically.
I'd love to. I've written some notes here because I can't speak without having notes. I'm a bit of a slow thinker. And Isabel gave us some questions to sort of prompt our thinking for this afternoon. So I've tried to write something that kind of answers those questions about what International Women's Day means to me personally and how I see it, its relationship with feminism and trans politics as well. So hopefully this isn't too muddled. It took me a long time to get involved with International Women's Day, and I think this was because I didn't grow up with any special awareness of myself as a gendered person. It wasn't until I was well into my teens that I started to have this real sense that I belonged to a particular category of people, of gendered people, in my instance women. And it wasn't until I went to uni that I began to think really seriously and critically about the way that I was gendered. When I was at uni, I found a language in which I could speak about the kinds of problems or thoughts I'd intuited over the years about how I did gender and about what it meant for me to be a woman, and about how my gender interacted with other aspects of my identity. I also began to understand that gender is a political issue. It was at this point that I started to notice that gender activism had been happening all around me and feel that it was something that I wanted to participate in. Even with this new perspective, I think the first International Women's Day that I actually actively participated in was probably in about 2010 when I started working in the community sector. But given that I now work for an organisation that has a mandate to work with women, I can't ignore International Women's Day. It can never pass me by again. I attend breakfasts and read press releases and I wear a little purple ribbon, but in spite of this I found it quite hard writing this to articulate what International Women's Day means to me. I don't think this is because I'm unclear about my own politics. I call myself a feminist because I believe that your gender implicates you in a network of power relations within which you might be silenced, sidelined, denied access to resources or opportunities, submitted to violence of different kinds, or made to feel shit about yourself generally. I also believe that it's worthwhile exposing these forces that create disparity and finding ways to resist them. I think it's important to talk about burdens of caring, violence, unequal political and economic representation, and what it's like to live in a world where your choices are restricted. What I don't believe is that all women everywhere share a set of common interests. I think that when feminist politics tries to make that case, for whatever reason, sometimes understandable, in the name of solidarity, it necessarily entails leaving some people and maybe lots of people behind. It also makes invisible a whole realm of issues that don't fit within the mandate of feminism, but which maybe also involve gender and power, and I think that trans and intersex issues are probably a good example of that. Likewise, I don't believe that highlighting the different kinds of violence that women live through means ignoring or devaluing other, maybe less familiar or visible kinds of violence. Basically, I think that we need new ways of speaking about gender politics that don't set the interests of one group against another. And we've seen some good examples of this recently with the Julie Burchill and Suzanne Moore controversy, and I hear conversations like that all the time in the women's sector, where men and trans people can be framed as a risk or a threat, and intersex people can be ignored altogether. I think we need to find a way to recognise, value and respect diversity at the same time as making those forces of discrimination and marginalisation visible. I believe that it would be a really worthwhile project to trace the common threads between trans and feminist politics, because I think it would have the effect of making both movements more real, by which I mean more genuinely engaged with crucial issues and more sensitive to vulnerabilities wherever they are and however they might look. So, in the light of all that, I'd say that International Women's Day gives me an opportunity to think about women, power and violence all around the globe, to think about my own positioning within that. And it's also maybe a good time to look back at the state of play, like at the turn of the 20th century, and to think about what it means to say that the context is different now, or to say that we've come a long way. But I guess what I want even more from International Women's Day, if it's possible, is for it to bring these thoughts together with a wider and more radical appreciation of gendered violence or discrimination across the gender spectrum. But maybe we need a whole new day for
that. And like you, I came into International Women's Day really late, like it was only like 2010, maybe 2009, and again working at the AIDS Council was when I first became aware of it. And I wasn't really aware of the feminist movement before then. Like, I know it sounds really weird, but for me, International Women's Day means a lot of different things, and I believe it's a celebration of women and lots of different women, not just the mother or the, you know, not that kind of stuff. So, so it's the woman that's very feminine, wearing skirts and makeup and jewellery, to the more butch jeans and flannelette, which is what I usually wear. The outspoken woman, the quietly proud, and the ones who don't care or don't know. It's a celebration of all of those. It's a day of pride for me, and it marks how far women have come from being just an incubator. As in the past, that's all women were seen to be able to do and able to understand. It also makes me stop and realise how far we haven't come too. As I said, only a couple of years ago I got involved in International Women's Day, and I've not always seen myself as a feminist, and I don't always think in that term. But you can imagine my surprise when one of my girlfriends said to me, "You're a feminist, Lex," and I went, "I'm a what?" She goes, "You're a feminist." I'm like, "Oh, I thought I was just doing what the rights that I was fighting for at that particular point in time were, they affected me and they affected the other people I worked with, but it didn't go, oh, I'm a female and they're females, and so therefore it's a feminist issue, the work rights." And so I was like, no, they're just my work colleagues, and I'm just doing what I feel is right for us. So yeah, so that was kind of a bit of a surprise. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think a feminist is? Is she the woman that believes that sex work is rape and believes that she needs to save the woman from this? Is she the one who stands up for her fellow workers and rights in the place that she works? Is she the plaque-carrying protester screaming, "What do we want and when do we want it?" Is she the bra-burning hippie? Is she the stay-at-home mum who has always wanted to be a stay-at-home mum but has never been able to articulate that because what do you want to do when you finish school? It's not okay. It's not politically correct to go, "I want to be a stay-at-home mother." People are horrified at that. Sure. It's a choice. And can a feminist be a male?
Yes.
Or is she the woman who accepts a woman for who she is without trying to push onto her what she feels that she should be, or how she should behave, or she should be like this? And for the around trans politics, I really can't say very much because I really don't know. And that's why I came today, because I want to open that conversation and I need that knowledge. I can read lots of stuff on the web, that's great, and that gives me lots of words on the web. It doesn't give me the passion, it doesn't give me what's at the grassroots of issues, and whether they are like feminist issues or if there is a common ground or they're polar opposites. But I also want to ask you guys a question. In starting that conversation this way, I want to ask, so do you think sex work is real work? Thank you for listening to me today, and thank you for giving me this opportunity.
It seemed to me they were both exactly 5 minutes, so very
well done.
Yes, Peter, Lexxie probably, so I was sent these questions in Adelaide and I did read them there, but then I lost them and come back to Canberra with me. So I didn't particularly address the International Women's Day, but as you've taught, I think it's important if I tell you that my memory is that after women's liberation starting in Sydney and then Canberra and then Melbourne and Adelaide in 1971 someone sort of found out about International Women's Day, which was started, if I'm right, in 1908 by the garment workers in New York, and their thing was bread and roses, like give a small pay, but you know, it's about family and love and people and human relationships as well. And ever since then, 1971, there's been Women's Day IWD marches in Australia. Being I was at Adelaide this week, where I used to live and I know many people, yesterday, and I think this is happening more and more all around Australia, the main event in Adelaide, and they got 2,427 people, was a breakfast. And it is a sort of United Nations Stop Violence Against Women type breakfast, but the Premier comes, the Governor comes, all the politicians come, schools send, you know, the private girls' schools send 8 students each, and you know, they have Anne Summers flew over to speak, and it's like this big deal, but there's so much talking and eating breakfast, eggs and bacon, no one actually gets to really talk to each other or, you know, go, fantastic, or, you know, like. And then late yesterday in Adelaide, all my old mates had an old-fashioned IWD march, all dressed in white and green and purple, and there's a lot of white heads, but not all by any means, and there was a lot of speeching and singing, and then a march, you know, a short march through the city with, you know, a lot of kind of celebratory sounds. It was kind of really cool. But back in the 70s, like in Sydney, for example, there would be thousands of women, thousands marched, and that's when the press was full of, you know, how ludicrous women's lib was, or women's libs, and were completely made fun of in that period. But I'm just going to jump really to the last question, which was what do you see commonality and differences between feminist and trans politics, because that's kind of what I was thinking about. But I'm going to go right back to the beginning to tell you about that, because I think for me it was an identity moment, and I've never thought of it like that, but trans politics has made me think that even when you've got the two boxes, at least for women, there can the oppressed half, there can be identity, because the very first meeting I went to, this little group that started in Sydney, and there was a big anti-war conference on one weekend in January, and the Sunday afternoon, the Sydney people had decided there'll just be a women's session, and the men aren't going to have a parallel session, they just have to go away, go to the pub and do something else. And this was like extraordinary, I've never heard of such a thing. And I went along to that meeting very, very angry, because I thought, what's this women's liberation? It's ridiculous, I've never heard of it before, you know. Vietnam's the big thing, that was my big passion, and sort of how dare we divert. And the women who did that meeting had 5 women speaking for 10 minutes each about why they were in it. And I don't remember the first 3, but the 4th one talked about how she'd grown up sort of the middle class, being told that she was bright and she could do anything. She lived in the northern beaches of Sydney, and she had a surfboard, you know, back in the 60s when women didn't do stuff like that. she had a real thing that she was as good as a boy. And then she read a book by French-Algerian, Frantz Fanon's book, where he talks about how a lot of the upper-class, middle-class Algerians who were colonised by the French came to believe they were as good as the French, and that was incredibly important to them. So they were looking down on what they actually were, which was Algerian. They were saying that's not good enough. And this woman, Julie Gibson, said she went to a party and realised, that she always wanted to be talking with the men because they were the important ones and women were boring, and that she was in fact discounting herself and hating herself. And I felt like I'd been hit in the stomach with a sledgehammer, because that's what I've always done. I was 27 at the time. Oh my God. So I was like this incredible convert. Boom! Really converted, but just in the last 2 days I've been thinking that was an identity moment. I mean, I'd never really identified as a woman. I was just a girl. So there was no language around, there was no discourse, there was nothing. You just were. And suddenly I had this identity that was very strong. Now the second thing I wanted to say was, I mentioned it before in this room, but I believe in the early years of women's liberation, what we were on about was sexism as a system, not as just the oppression of women. That sexism gives roles to men and women and to children, and a heterosexual family, nuclear family. It sets up the whole thing, and that what we were on about in the beginning was undoing all of that, and that this would free men and children as well. And within 2 years we kind of lost really, because Will came on the picture and the whole debate went into equality. And I really like the badge that my friend was wearing last night. It says, let's go. People say that feminism's about equality. I can't remember. Do you know the punchline? When people say feminism's about wanting to be as good as a man, I think they're sort of underachieving or something. Who wants, like this is ridiculous. Like the roles, the pure sexist roles that are given to both are very limited, and in fact incredibly damaging to men. All that machismo stuff. So I think that the whole equality thing that feminism has become, and most people will say that feminism equals equality and a fair go and equal pay for equal work, and it does mean all those things. I would never kind of say it doesn't mean those things, but to me it's very sad that it's come to mean only those things, and it could be so much bigger. And so my fourth thing was just that when I was able to be involved in the AGA storytelling weekend and spent 48 hours with some people in this room and some others, and hearing the stories and experiences, and just starting my first steps to really learn about trans politics, I just heard sort of not exactly echoes of that early women's liberation, but connected sort of ideas that trans politics is about blowing two boxes apart and having 1,000 possibilities of identity and ways of being. And that made me very excited, because I'm one of the few females around that think there's never lost that vision that we had in the beginning. And so that's why I flew back early to be part of this discussion today.
Thank you.